You must remember this, a kiss is still a kiss.
Hello everyone, Anita here and welcome to part 2 of my Arteza watercolor paper and colored pencils review. Now if you haven't seen part 1 of this review, which is more of a first impression kind of thing, there's a link in the description so you can watch that first if you would like. But today I'm not going to be talking about the basics of those products. This is more like a how they actually work, like an in-depth how they work review, because I've painted a whole painting using only those products, kind of with a fresh mind, prepared on what was to come, and I have to say I'm very positive today, and I hope you will be too after watching this video. As you can see, I'm starting with an A4 painting, which is quite big for me lately. I haven't worked on a more detailed A4 painting in a while. I don't know what possessed me, but it was a good decision. And I'm taping the paper, which is of course the Arteza cold pressed watercolor paper. I'm taping it directly to my work surface just because it's so big and I didn't have a board. This was not the best decision for what I'm going to be doing, but yeah, it worked fine. So what I have here is a very basic painting, really. It's just a portrait of a girl. But before we're gonna discuss why I've decided that, here is a look at what the watercolors look like after a couple of days of drying. I believe it was about a week worth of drying. They've been laying like this in my closet. As you can see, they have all crumbled and they are coming apart from the palette, which for me, that's a problem. I've never had this happening before. My watercolors, even the cheapest ones, they've always sat properly in their little, compartments. Now, there are things you can mix into the watercolors to have them stick better. I think I've watched a video from Denise from In Liquid Color where she mixes in some honey and glycerin into her watercolor. So there are things you can, add to it. So I wouldn't call it a big problem. After I've added water, like you see me doing it right now, a lot of those colors, not all of them, but a lot of them have stuck to the palette, like they are still stuck after a whole 2 days, right? That will be 2 days. So it's just a matter of being prepared for what's to come. And they are really nicely reactivating. I have really no problems with them, despite the chalky appearance and everything. So it's just something to bear in mind, because I was a little bit, concerned when I first saw it, and it didn't turn out to be a problem at all. So why I'm working on this specific particular idea is because I wanted a painting that had big surfaces, so I could really see how the watercolor worked, because watercolor tends to work much easier, of course, on smaller surfaces, because there is not that much that can go wrong on a small surface. So I wanted here to have a piece of skin, because that usually has to be very smooth and pretty, and there is very delicate shading that needs to be done. Now, I don't do much of a delicate, realistic shading, but you get the point, right? And then I wanted to have something more textured, like hair, so she has a whole head of bushy hair. And then I wanted to have just a chunky sweater and some, just big surfaces. Now, she is holding her hands in a specific position because there is a little bit of magic, of course, coming at the end. I have to have some magic in my pictures. So I'll be using white gouache in the end and some white pencils. So I had a very specific idea in my mind what I wanted to achieve. Now I'm going to say it straight away. I am into bushy eyebrows lately, and I think I've overdone it a little bit in this painting. I don't know, what do you guys think? Because when my boyfriend came in, I was almost done. I was super happy with this painting. He came in and he's like, Anita, what is that thing on her face? The dark thing? I'm like, what dark thing? The thing there. I'm like, that's her eyebrow. He's like, oh my, seriously? She looks like someone hit her with a stone. So yeah, my confidence kind of dropped at that point. So I'm gonna put it like straight. I'm actually really happy with it. I love bushy eyebrows lately. I don't know what it is. Perhaps, it would have looked better if she had two. It looks a little bit awkward if there's just one, because the other one, of course, is covered by hair. So, yeah. But back to the topic. Once I've settled that matter, as you can see here, I'm having a little bit of trouble blending in those watercolors. They are, like I've mentioned in my previous video, they are very chalky, and they have a very, I wouldn't call it really chalky, although they are a little bit, let's be honest. But they almost appear to me as the fake gouache that I kind of used to use when I've added some white watercolor to my regular watercolors, and that gave them kind of like a chalky appearance. Now that was a tip I got from one of my watercolor classes that I took during school thing. And lady there said that if you want to have a very, very flat surface in your watercolor, add just a little bit of white, and that will like kind of make the pigment lay better. And I would say, yeah, that's absolutely true. One thing that I have to say, that not all of them, because I've used only 3 colors here really, so I can't really say about all of the watercolors, but some of them lay much flatter than the others. Some pigments separate much more than the others. This purple here is a mix of phthalo blue and that mauve purple that I have in the corner of my palette. I just really wanted to use that color. And that mix, as you can see here on the sweater, it just lays beautifully. I can't really shade with it, and I was so happy that I did the shading, the basic shading, before adding the top layer, because it was just impossible to do any shading, as I've noticed on the skin when I've wanted to add a little bit more definition, a little bit more of that cheek, pinks, and it was just impossible to add anything without lifting the layer in underneath, which for some is not a problem. For me, I like to have, that softness and soft shading. So for me, it was just, I decided, I'm not even going to try on the sweater. I'm just going to do basic shading like I've done on the sweater. As you can see, the torso of the sweater, the torso part, is darker because I've added that in first. So a good tip when you're working with watercolors that are lifting, do the shading, the basic shading first, and then add the top layer. That kind of, because it kind of reactivates the watercolor underneath, it smooths everything nicely. I don't know how to explain it. It's just a, basic thing I remembered from using my very, very old watercolor set. And then the rest of the shading, I tend to do like I did before. It was very nostalgic. I tend to do with patterns. So as you can see here, I'm adding that chunky sweater pattern to the sweater. The knit, yeah, that's what I was looking for, the knit pattern. And I'm making sure that the knit pattern on the sleeves is much lighter than the one on the torso, because I wanted to have that torso part much, much darker, so that the magic that she's holding, the little magical creature she's holding in her hands, would stand out a little bit better. Then I'm starting to add this. I've decided, like I've mentioned, you know what, I'm not gonna bother with too many layers of shading. I'm just going to add the basic of the basic, and then come back with colored pencils, much more than I expected initially. That's something I've been going away from lately with my new watercolor set, just because I can do much more with it than, it doesn't pick up so easily like this one does. I don't know if maybe this is also the reason that the cause of the paper, like the paper causes it to lift really easily. It's not a problem, like I've mentioned, it's just something to bear in mind. Same as here, as I've mentioned before, some of the colors are separating more than the others. Now this is, I believe, burnt sienna. I wanted to have like this nice brown color, and if you can see me just picking it up sometimes when I try to pick up those pools of water, because the paper buckled a lot, and when I'm trying to pick up those pools of water, the pigment, it just separates immediately. There are some black flakes here and there, which is also not a big problem for me at all. But I did not see that coming, so it didn't come out in the swatches. It's just something to bear in mind. It seems to me like this paint tends to work better if it's a little bit more concentrated. Whether the first layers that I've put down that were very, very light were really separating easily. Also, later on, I'm mixing into that burnt sienna. I'm mixing some of that mauve, the purple, and that mix actually lays much better, and it doesn't separate so quickly. I'm guessing it's just that the ratio of pigment is kind of different, and yeah, it's once again something to consider. So whenever I have colors that do this to me, that are a little bit more on the opaque side or more pigmented or tend to separate, I tend to add them to the painting in very, very thin layers. I'm adding a lot of water, very little pigment, and I prefer to spend a little bit more time adding those layers rather than have like a chunky, gritty texture. I like smooth texture in watercolor. Now, I have to say that if this was the baby Anita here, the Anita from 2 years ago, I would be going completely nuts. Because those little differences in color that I had in the first layer of, when I added the first layer of watercolor, of that brown mixture, that would just drive me insane. I had to have everything flat. If you can see here, the watercolor is also pulling and creating those little blooms, very awkward blooms, to be fair, but that would drive me insane. So I can't really say, these days I am a little bit more understanding, I guess. I don't mind those little different, textures and stuff, so it doesn't bother me. I actually really liked that little bit of texture that this watercolor provided. The next thing I've decided to do is that those first basic layers were looking very flat. Now, this watercolor tends to look really flat on its own. For example, the watercolor I'm using right now, I do not need to add this many layers to get that intensity of color. And here, I've added 3 layers of brown, and I still didn't get the intensity because the colors are drying really back. So I've decided to just, once again, step away from that and stop adding watercolor. That intensity can be brought back with colored pencil. That's why I've started using colored pencils to begin with. So to that brown, I've mixed in some of that purple, as I've mentioned before. And the color, like I've said, immediately started laying much better. And adding a little bit more of intensity as well, and a little bit more depth to the painting. So I still kept adding it very carefully. I guess carefully is the good word, because at this point I started really liking what I was doing. Like you guys know, if you keep watching me for a while, I've been struggling with my painting style and trying to discover, new, more freer ways of painting. So I actually kept really liking what I was seeing, and that made me panic because I was afraid to mess it up. But I did mess it up. I'm actually really, really happy with how it turned out. So that's a spoiler alert for later. So here I've added a little bit more phthalo blue to that purple mixture just to kind of cool it down. I felt like everything was becoming way too warm in that painting. One thing that these watercolors are really good at is that you actually can pick them up. That's, depending on your painting style, that can go both ways, because I've added too much color under the hair, in those dark areas in the hair, next to her collar and next to her, sweater. And that was the exact same color that I've added in the background, kind of started making her seem like she had like those 2 tufts of hair on both sides of her head. And I hated that. So I actually picked up some of that color and added a bit more brownish tint instead of that blue tint. So it's a good way to remember that you can fix it in here, to a certain degree, of course. So now I'm starting to work with watercolor, with regular pencils, just regular pencils. And I've concentrated on the face quite a lot because the face didn't have any definition at all. I had to really work hard to add proper, colors and everything and just a little bit more depth to the face. It turned out really well. Like I've mentioned before, I am really in love with those colored pencils. They are so smooth and so, creamy, and they really work well with these watercolors. I'm still to find out if they work with my regular watercolors. I'm assuming they are, if they work on this textured paper. And I would like you guys to notice that you can barely see the texture. It's not as distinct as when I used it in my previous, like the first impression review, when I've added very thick layers of that, watercolor, when the pigment separated into the grooves. Here, when I've added very thin layers and the pigment lays smoothly, you don't really see that. Now you can see it a little bit when I'm adding the colored pencil, but I'm actually not hating that at all. Really, really liking it. So it's just a matter of, figuring out how to use the paper to, fit your needs. Now, I've read your comments under the previous video, and some of you mentioned that this reminded you of a canvas print or something that you would find on a carpet or, a fabric as well. So that's actually a really good tip, maybe this paper would be perfect for just, practicing some textile designs. And someone mentioned that perhaps Arteza was actually going for this mechanical, like a canvas print, like a canvas texture, which, yeah, I can actually totally see it because this seems to me like a canvas texture. So once again, this is just something to consider. It is a cold pressed paper, so it will always have a texture. But the colored pencil layers really nicely over it. I would even consider it more of a mixed media paper rather than just typically watercolor paper. Yeah, I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts about this paper, but I have a lot of it, so I will still have to figure out the back side of the paper, because the back side of this paper is smooth, which means that potentially it could work as a hot pressed paper. But there's always two sides of the paper, and one is usually only meant for painting. The other one works a little bit different. So it's just, we will have to see how that works out. I'm definitely going to be painting with it at some point. We'll see. So here I just keep adding the colored pencil. I'm sorry for the little flashes of light. I don't know if you guys are noticing it or not. I'm having problem figuring my lighting sources a little bit. But I'm adding, whenever I pick up colored pencils for my painting, I try to stay within the same color range. So as you can see, I have picked up a few colors that I've considered, okay, they might come in handy. So I have an ultramarine blue that I've used everywhere. I have this one purple that's called eggplant, I believe, that I've used a lot as well. And then one brown that I don't remember. And these are usually the colors I will stick with. Now, so my base is ready, and now I'm coming in with the white details and that little bit of magic. So at first I've sketched it with white pencil. Arteza white is unfortunately not good enough for me. It doesn't want to layer. It's a bit too waxy. So I've used a different colored pencil, and now I was trying to come in with the Signo gel pen, but I've decided that I will probably need to do some shading to have a little bit of a softer look. So I went in with just white gouache and white acrylic gouache, because white acrylic gouache I can layer on top of it without, disturbing the layer underneath. And I really came to like that liner brush that I've been using lately. It's just something, I just like it. And then, so I did a basic outline of that bunny. And I'm coming in with just the same indigo blue or ultramarine blue, something like that. One of the two, probably both. And then a little bit of black at the end as well. And I'm darkening the inside of the bunny just to give a little bit more definition. A little bit more contrast between the white. And on the outside, I'm coming in with that white Derwent pencil. I think it's like a soft, almost, it has a very, very chalky texture, almost like a soft pastel. It's a beautiful pencil. Unfortunately, I needed more white. So what I'm doing here is, as you can see, I'm adding very thin lines around the bunny, just trying to, you know, add a little bit more of a shading effect without actually, you know, disturbing the watercolor underneath, because I couldn't paint anything more than this because, you know, the watercolor underneath is so lifting. So I'm adding a few more little white details, and that's pretty much it. I'm done, really. I was so extremely giddy at this point because, as I mentioned, guys, I've been struggling. Okay, I've been struggling with painting since last August, and as I've been getting better, you know, I've mentioned before that it's been getting much better, but I didn't feel like I was getting anywhere, and you know, I was making little steps, trying to be more free. But this painting, despite the misplaced chin and despite the giant eyebrow, this is just, I am so extremely happy with how it turned out. Really, it's probably my best one in a while. As you can see, I've started incorporating the things I've learned during October. It just came out really good. Here you can see the really close up on the texture of the paper. Pay attention to the texture to see how, you know, you can see it on when the colored pencil is layered, but you can't really see it if, you know, if you have nice flat washes of watercolor. It was a little bit hard to put those flat washes of watercolor. That's what I wanted to say. If you want to put flat washes of watercolor, your paper should be a little bit tilted. It makes it so much easier. But I had only flat surface because I taped it to my working surface. Like, you know, it is what it is, okay? It came out nicely. And as before, I had absolutely no problems picking the tape off of the paper, but yet again, I do not trust any paper to release the tape without some heat. So that's, yeah, I wouldn't even dare to rip the tape without any heat gun or, you know, any heat source at all, because no, just no, this painting was making me way too happy for this. So yeah, guys, that's it for today. This is my last Arteza review. I've went through all the things they've sent me. There's still a coupon code for 10% off of their website that's still valid till the end of March. So you can grab that if you would like. And yeah, unfortunately for my international viewers, there's only Amazon, and the coupon code does not work on Amazon. So yeah, I've heard also that there are some problems with shipping to Canada. But thank you so very much for watching, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please let me know in the comments below if you like this painting, because I'm just like so super giddy with excitement here. Thank you so very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!